10 things you should never say to a man, a woman's honest take. Some words build love, others quietly tear it down. We women can be incredibly intuitive, wise, and nurturing, but in moments of frustration or emotional pain, we sometimes let slip words that wound far deeper than we realize. Especially when spoken to the man we love. So let's get real for a moment. If you want to protect your relationship, preserve his dignity, and nurture mutual respect, here are 10 things you should never say to a man. Ever. You're not a real man. This phrase doesn't just wound, it devastates. It's not feedback, it's an identity strike. When you say this to a man, you're not challenging a momentary behavior or a poor choice. You're attacking the very foundation of how he sees himself. And whether he's aware of it or not, most men carry a quiet, lifelong question in the back of their minds. Am I enough? Am I strong enough, capable enough, worthy enough to be called a man by the woman I love? So when you throw this phrase like a dagger, especially during conflict, it doesn't land on the surface. It drives straight into his deepest insecurities. And it does something dangerous. It turns you from a source of trust and intimacy into a voice of shame. To understand the gravity of this statement, you have to understand the weight many men carry silently. From a young age, boys are told what they must do or be to earn their manhood. Be stoic, be tough, be dominant, never cry, always provide. Many grow into adulthood still chasing an impossible version of masculinity they never fully understand. So when their partner, the person who sees them in their most unguarded moments, uses the phrase, "You're not a real man," it can unravel something inside them. It doesn't challenge them to grow. It convinces them they're already failing. And here's the thing, love and masculinity are not mutually exclusive. Real men feel, real men falter, real men question themselves, but none of that makes them any less real. If anything, it makes them more human. If you're feeling disappointed, unsupported, or emotionally disconnected, say that. Use real language, not weaponized shame. Say, "I need more presence from you," or "I don't feel safe right now," or even, "I miss the way we used to be." That creates a bridge. "You're not a real man" creates a wall. And walls, no matter how strong they seem, always lead to silence. Or worse, distance that feels impossible to close. My ex did that better. There are words that bruise, and then there are words that haunt. This is one of the latter. When you tell a man that your ex did something better, whether it's making you laugh, planning dates, being in bed, or solving problems, you are not just offering a comparison. You are declaring that another man, someone he cannot be and should never have to become, holds a higher place in your mind than he does in your heart. It might come out in a heated moment. It might sound like a sarcastic throwaway. But make no mistake, it lands like a betrayal. Not of physical loyalty, but of emotional allegiance. And that kind of betrayal can leave cracks that don't show on the surface, but widen over time. Men are deeply competitive creatures by nature, often because society has conditioned them to measure their worth through performance. So when you introduce the idea that they're not measuring up, not to a standard, but to another man, it instantly puts them on unstable ground. He'll wonder, what else did your ex do better? Do you still think about him? Am I just a replacement? The moment those questions take root, you've shifted the energy of the relationship from closeness to competition. What's worse, he can never win in that comparison. Your ex is in the past, and memory has a way of softening flaws and sharpening highlights. He's competing with a ghost. And in trying to be what your ex was, he may lose sight of who he is. Emotionally, this creates disconnection. Instead of inspiring growth, it breeds resentment. Instead of building trust, it plants doubt. And eventually, it changes the way he shows up for you, not because he doesn't care, but because he no longer feels like he's playing a role he can win at. So what should you do instead? If something is lacking, whether it's emotional intimacy, excitement, attentiveness, say so. Own your feelings. Don't outsource your needs to someone who's no longer in your life. Try, "I miss the spontaneity we used to have," or "I feel like we've lost some of our spark." That opens a dialogue instead of a wound. Because ultimately, no one wants to feel like a backup plan. And when you compare the man you're with to someone you've left behind, you don't just hurt him. You hurt the future you're still trying to build. You can't do anything right. These 6 words might seem like a momentary outburst, said in frustration or anger. But to a man, especially one who's trying, showing up, putting in effort, they don't just sting. They sink. When you say this, you're not addressing a specific problem or even venting about a particular situation. You're labeling him as the problem. You're saying, in essence, that failure isn't something he experienced, it's something he is. That distinction is brutal. And often, it's the beginning of emotional erosion that's hard to reverse. For many men, their self-worth is tightly wound around the idea of competence. They want to feel useful, capable, and appreciated. Whether it's fixing something around the house, helping with a task, or just supporting you emotionally, the desire to get it right is often tied directly to their sense of masculinity. So when you say, "You can't do anything right," it echoes far beyond the moment. It reinforces every doubt he's ever had about himself, every childhood memory of being criticized, every insecurity he carries into adulthood. You may have meant it as an exaggeration, but to him, it feels like a truth you've been holding back and just now decided to weaponize. The result? He might shut down, he might retreat, or he might start tiptoeing around you, afraid that every attempt to help or lead or support will be met with more judgment. Over time, that fear builds resentment. And once resentment enters a relationship, closeness has no room to breathe. There's also a quieter tragedy here. When a man hears often enough that he can't do anything right, eventually, he might stop trying altogether. Not because he doesn't care, but because he believes trying only opens the door to more failure in your eyes. He'll disengage, he'll emotionally disconnect, and the very support or presence you were longing for? It becomes even more distant. Of course, there are times when we're upset. Times when we need more. But the key is in the delivery. If something was done poorly or neglected, say that. "This didn't turn out the way I hoped," or, "Can we talk about what happened?" Centers the conversation on the event, not the person. That opens the door to resolution, not destruction. Words like always and never are emotional shortcuts. They feel powerful, but they rarely leave room for nuance. And relationships are all nuance. Love isn't about perfection, it's about being safe enough to be imperfect without being diminished for it. I don't respect you. If love is the heart of a relationship, respect is the spine. It holds everything upright, even when things feel shaky. And for most men, respect isn't just something they like to have, it's something they need to feel secure in a relationship. Without it, love feels conditional, transactional, even hollow. Saying, "I don't respect you," to a man doesn't just break a rule of communication, it breaks him. It tells him he's failed, not just as a partner, but as a human being. Because respect, for men, is often linked to identity. To be respected by the woman he loves means he is trusted, valued, and seen. To lose that in her eyes can feel like losing a part of himself. Now, let's be honest. There are moments in any relationship when respect can feel strained. Maybe he's made poor decisions. Maybe he hasn't shown up when you needed him most. Maybe he's been passive, selfish, distracted. Those things can and should be addressed. But the difference between saying, "I'm struggling to respect the way you're handling this," and "I don't respect you," is immense. The first invites accountability. The second delivers judgment with no room to grow. The problem is, when a man hears that he's lost your respect, he often interprets it as something permanent. Irredeemable, a point of no return. And unless you clearly communicate otherwise, that belief will shape how he engages with you moving forward. He might pull back, stop opening up, or worse, start acting out the very version of himself he thinks you already believe in, unworthy of respect. There's also a darker side to this. Some men, when told repeatedly that they are not respected, begin seeking it elsewhere. Not just in other women, but in environments, people, or behaviors that give them back a sense of power or pride. That doesn't justify betrayal, but it explains the emotional vacuum this kind of comment can create. So ask yourself this: is the issue truly him as a person? Or is it his behavior, his choices, his attitude in a specific situation? Because if it's the latter, there's space to rebuild. There's a conversation to be had. But once you tear away respect as a whole, it's incredibly hard to get it back. Ultimately, saying, "I don't respect you," isn't a moment of truth, it's a moment of emotional violence. One that may feel satisfying in the moment, but will leave long-term wreckage in its wake. If there's still love, if there's still hope, there are better ways to speak your truth. Firmly, honestly, but with dignity, for both of you. I don't need you, I can do everything myself. This phrase might sound like empowerment on the surface, but to a man in a relationship, it often feels like exile. Independence is powerful. It's beautiful when a woman knows her worth and can handle her life with grace and resilience. But when that independence turns into a rejection of partnership, the message shifts from, I'm strong, to, you're irrelevant. And no one, man or woman, wants to feel disposable in love. For many men, the desire to be needed isn't about dominance or control, it's about purpose. Contribution, emotional connection. The masculine instinct to provide, protect, and support isn't about ego, it's about feeling significant. When you repeatedly tell him, directly or through subtle cues, that you don't need anything from him, he begins to feel like an accessory in your life, not a partner. This can lead to quiet resignation. He might still show up physically, but emotionally he'll begin to detach. He'll stop offering help, not out of resentment, but because he no longer believes he has a meaningful role in your world. And what's worse, over time, he might start to believe the lie himself, that you're better off without him. There's also something deeply lonely about being with someone who's constantly signaling self-sufficiency. Intimacy isn't built on showing how much you can carry alone, it's built in the moments when you allow someone to carry something with you. When you say, I don't need you, you're not just asserting strength. You're closing a door to shared vulnerability and shared joy. It's important to remember that asking for help or allowing support isn't weakness, it's an invitation. Letting someone show up for you says, I trust you. I value what you bring. I believe we're stronger together. That doesn't diminish your power, it deepens the connection. So if you're used to doing it all, pause and ask yourself, is this about protecting your pride or protecting your heart? And if it's the latter, can you find the courage to let someone in, even if it's uncomfortable at first? Because love is not about proving you don't need anyone. It's about choosing to walk side by side with someone, even when you could walk alone. You don't make enough money. This sentence doesn't just bruise, it slices right through a man's sense of self. For many men, fair or not, their identity has been shaped by the pressure to provide. To be seen as capable, competent, and strong providers is often deeply embedded in their psyche, sometimes even more than they realize. When you say, you don't make enough money, what he hears is, you're not enough. You're failing me, you're not a man I can depend on. Even if you didn't mean it to cut so deeply, this statement lands in the most vulnerable part of his emotional terrain. It taps into every societal narrative that says a man's worth is defined by his wallet, his job title, his paycheck. And if he's already struggling, financially, professionally, or emotionally, this comment won't push him to rise. It will likely push him to retreat, or worse, spiral into shame and defensiveness. The tragic part? Many men already carry a silent burden about money. They compare themselves constantly, to peers, to expectations, to their own fathers, even. What they need in a relationship is not judgment, but perspective. Not pressure, but partnership. When you attack his income, you're not just addressing a financial issue, you're shaking the emotional foundation of the relationship. Because whether or not he says it out loud, part of him wonders, if I can't give her the lifestyle she wants, will she stop loving me? And this can create a dangerous loop. He may shut down. He may overwork himself into burnout trying to prove his worth. Or, in a heartbreaking twist, he may feel so emasculated that he stops trying altogether. The fear of constant inadequacy can breed apathy, resentment, or emotional distance. Instead of saying, you don't make enough money, consider saying, can we talk about our financial goals together? This reframes the conversation as teamwork, not judgment. It invites transparency, mutual planning, and shared responsibility. And it opens the door to solutions, rather than closing the door with shame. Because in the end, money is never just money. It's about value, security, future. And how we talk about it in relationships defines whether we're building those things together, or silently tearing them down. You're just like your father, mother. There are few statements in a relationship that carry as much hidden weight, and potential damage, as this one. At first glance, it might seem like a casual jab. But beneath the surface, it's a deeply loaded accusation that targets not just behavior, but heritage, identity, and emotional history. When you compare a man to one of his parents, especially in a critical tone, you're not just pointing out a flaw. You're implying that his flaws are permanent, inherited, inevitable, and that can cut far deeper than you may intend. Family is rarely a neutral topic. Everyone's relationship with their parents is layered, complex, and often fraught with unspoken tension. He may have spent years trying not to become his father, or he may have idolized a parent and now feels insulted by the comparison. Either way, when you throw his lineage into the middle of an argument, you're no longer speaking to the moment, you're weaponizing his past. This kind of comment also creates emotional distance instantly. It says, I'm not addressing you, the person I chose to be with. I'm addressing this version of you I've labeled as damaged or doomed. And that doesn't open the door for change, it slams it shut. It communicates that you believe he's incapable of growth because who he is has already been decided, by DNA. And even if he doesn't say it, this kind of comparison breeds quiet resentment. He may feel betrayed that someone he trusted with his vulnerabilities is now using his deepest insecurities as ammunition. He might even pull away, not just from the conversation, but from the relationship, because now you're no longer his safe space. You're someone who sees him through a distorted lens, shaped by blame and past trauma. If there's something specific that's upsetting you, anger, detachment, a pattern you've seen before, talk about that. Use your own words. Describe your feelings. When you shut down like that, it reminds me of how we disconnect, is miles more constructive than, you're just like your father. It keeps the focus on behavior, not identity. Because once you make it about who he is, instead of what he's doing, the room for change and healing disappears. And relationships thrive in the spaces where people believe they're still allowed to grow. You don't know how to love. This sentence is devastating not because it points out a lack, but because it erases everything that's already been given. It takes whatever effort, affection, or vulnerability he has shown and casts it aside like it was meaningless. Few things are more painful to hear than the idea that your love, not just your actions, but your deepest emotions, are invisible or insufficient in the eyes of the person you love. The truth is, love doesn't look the same for everyone. Some people express it through words, others through actions. Some through physical touch, others through quiet presence. And for many men, love is something they do, not something they say. Fixing the broken faucet, making sure you got home safely, sitting beside you silently when you're in pain. These aren't random gestures, they're expressions of devotion. They may not be wrapped in poetry, but they are love in motion. So when you say, you don't know how to love, what you're really saying is, I don't recognize your love. I don't receive it the way I need to. And that's an important conversation to have, but not this way. Because the moment you frame it as a deficiency within him, you shift from requesting more to declaring he's already failed. It's also important to recognize that some men were never taught how to express love openly. They weren't raised with emotional fluency. They might fumble with words or be unsure how to show up during conflict. That doesn't mean they don't love you, it means they're learning how to show it in a way that makes sense to you. That takes time, trust, and space. And when you dismiss his efforts entirely, when you call his love not enough, or not real, it doesn't motivate him to love you better. It discourages him from trying at all. He begins to feel like no matter what he gives, it will never land. That his love, in the language he knows how to speak, will always be lost in translation. Instead of saying, you don't know how to love, say, I need to feel your love in ways I can understand. Or, sometimes I feel disconnected from you, I want to feel more emotionally close. That invites him into the process, rather than pushing him out of it. Because love isn't a test you pass or fail. It's a lifelong practice of learning one another's needs, fears, and expressions. If you can honor his love, even when it doesn't look like yours, you create space for both of you to expand. And that's where real connection lives. Look at him, pointing to another man. At first glance, this may seem like a passing comment. A little jab, a quick comparison said out of irritation or disappointment. But make no mistake, few things humiliate a man more than being held up against someone else in front of the woman he wants to impress, protect, and be desired by. It doesn't matter whether you're pointing to his looks, his job, his confidence, or how he holds the door open. What your partner hears, instantly and undeniably, is, that man is better than you. What makes this moment so damaging is its public nature, even if you're the only witness. Pointing, referencing, or praising another man while making it obvious your partner falls short is not just a comparison. It's a declaration. It sends the message that you've been watching, evaluating, and deciding who deserves your attention. And in doing so, you put the man who loves you into competition with someone he can't, and shouldn't have to, compete with. Most men don't want to be perfect. But they do want to be enough for the woman they love. Enough in your eyes, enough in your heart. So when you look at another man and say, "Look at him," you're effectively telling your partner, "You're not enough, and I'm noticing it," loudly. Even if it's subtle or sarcastic, it chips away at something delicate. His confidence, his sense of masculinity, his emotional safety with you. Over time, this behavior can plant seeds of insecurity that grow into distance. He may start wondering how often you compare him to others when he's not around. He may begin to question whether you're truly happy, or if he's just the placeholder until something better comes along. These thoughts don't just fade. They fester. And they rarely lead to growth or vulnerability. Instead, they lead to guardedness, resentment, or indifference. What's even more tragic is that many of the men you might be comparing him to are likely strangers, people you don't know beyond a moment or a surface-level impression. Meanwhile, the man standing next to you is the one who shows up daily, who knows your fears and flaws, who's chosen to love you in his own imperfect way. And yet, in that moment, he's made to feel like less than someone else, and worse, less than enough for you. If there's something you admire in others that you wish you had more of in your relationship, talk about it. But frame it around your needs, not his deficiencies. I really appreciate when people take initiative. That makes me feel so cared for, is far more inviting than, "Why can't you be more like him?" One builds a bridge, the other builds a wall. Because love isn't about comparison. It's about choosing each other, even when the world is full of other options. Especially then. I'm not attracted to you anymore. There may be no more vulnerable terrain in a relationship than physical and sexual attraction. It's where confidence lives, where intimacy is built, where the unspoken magic of connection either sparks or flickers out. And to say to a man, plainly and coldly, "I'm not attracted to you anymore," doesn't just turn off the light, it shatters the entire room. For many men, physical attraction is deeply tied to emotional value. It's not just about feeling sexy or desired, it's about feeling seen. Loved, wanted. When you say you're no longer attracted to him, you're not just making an observation. You're telling him he no longer excites the person he wants most to impress. And that can unravel a man from the inside out. It's a kind of rejection that's deeply personal, because attraction isn't just about his appearance, it's about how you experience him. The sound of his voice. The way he laughs. The feeling of his touch. To suggest all of that is no longer enough is to say, "You no longer move me." And that's not just a blow to his ego, it's a wound to the relationship's soul. Even more damaging is when this phrase is delivered not as part of a loving, constructive conversation, but as a weapon. Maybe it's during an argument, or thrown out as a last resort in a moment of anger. But once it's said, it's hard to forget. And harder still to recover from. It lingers in his mind. When she looks at me, is she repulsed? Is she just pretending? Is she dreaming of someone else? And while it's perfectly human and normal for attraction to ebb and flow in long-term relationships, the way you speak about that shift can either draw your partner closer or push him away for good. Instead of condemning what's missing, speak about what you long for. "I miss feeling that spark between us," or "I want to feel more connected physically again," invites intimacy and opens the door for shared growth. It tells him, "I want more, not someone else." Remember, attraction is rarely just about abs or hairlines. It's about emotional closeness, humor, shared experiences, how he holds you when you cry, how he tries, even when he's tired. If that emotional space feels neglected, desire can fade. But it can also be reignited, not through shame, but through honesty and care. So if you feel the connection slipping, don't drop a bomb. Light a signal fire instead. Let him know you want him, and you want more with him. Because nothing kills attraction faster than cold dismissal. But nothing awakens it more than being reminded that he still matters. That he can still touch your heart. And that he's still the one you want to choose. Here's the truth. Men are not made of stone. They are not immune to pain. They are not incapable of feeling, even if those feelings are buried beneath layers of quiet, silence, or stoicism. The truth is, many men were taught from a young age to suppress vulnerability, to equate emotion with weakness, to keep their pain inside because showing it was somehow less manly. But just because they don't express hurt the same way, doesn't mean they don't feel it just as deeply. In fact, men often remember the words that cut the deepest long after they're spoken, especially when those words come from the one person they believed would never aim to hurt them. Not because they expect perfection, but because they hoped for safety, intimacy, understanding. When a man chooses to love, when he opens himself up, he does so with the unspoken hope that he can finally be, without judgment, without defense, without pretending to be tougher than he actually feels. And so when harsh words are thrown in the heat of conflict, words like, "You're not a real man," or "I don't respect you," or "I'm not attracted to you anymore," they don't just sting in the moment. They echo. They settle into his inner world and quietly shape how he sees himself, and how he begins to see you. Because while men may seem emotionally distant at times, they are deeply attuned to the tone of the relationship. They may not always say what hurts them, but they will remember what hurt them. And if that pain comes often enough, they'll protect themselves the only way they know how, by withdrawing. That's why the space between anger and response matters so much. Taking a breath isn't about silence, it's about choice. About pausing before using your words as weapons. Because while passion is human, destruction is optional. We often say things we don't mean when we speak from the wound instead of the heart. But here's what emotional maturity looks like. Saying, "I'm hurt," instead of trying to hurt back. Saying, "I need you," instead of, "You're not enough." Saying, "Let's figure this out," instead of, "You always screw this up." None of that makes you weak. In fact, it makes you incredibly strong. Because real strength isn't in controlling the other person, it's in mastering your own reactions. It's in choosing to build the relationship instead of burn it down in a moment of fire. And yes, you are allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel frustrated, disappointed, tired, misunderstood. But even in those moments, you still hold the power to speak with care. To reach instead of retaliate. Remember, intimacy isn't just built in grand gestures and passionate moments. It's built in how we speak to each other when we're hurt. How we handle each other's softest places. How we repair when things go wrong. That's the test of real connection, not how well you love when it's easy, but how deeply you protect the bond when it's hard. So the next time you feel like saying something sharp, pause and ask yourself, is this going to bring us closer or drive us apart? Is this coming from my pain, or from my love? One builds walls, the other builds bridges. Choose the bridge, choose the heart, every time.